Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. I'm super excited to connect with you guys again today. Another episode of Learn with Lo. Had an amazing weekend, had a great time being able to be part of the Women in Sport Day. If you've been following along on my stories all weekend, you've probably seen all of the great turnout that we had there. Big shout out again to Heartland Strength for hosting that event for us and really like walking away from some of those opportunities to really like educate a group, speak to a group, especially getting in front of women of all different ages, and seeing also a lot of different like parents and even males in the audience too was so awesome, because we get to really see like this big thirst for knowledge, especially like root cause knowledge when it comes to supporting female athletes, supporting female hormone balance. So it was such a cool event. And like I said, I was very, very happy to be a part of it. And every time I do events like this, it makes me more and more aware of how, like I said, thirsty and demanding people are for knowledge about how their body works. And I just think that that's so cool, because that's exactly my passion to do and why I like to reserve these Learn with Lo times for us to be able to do that. So today I really want to continue some of the conversations we've had so far of like kind of learning and unlearning how our conventional medicine looks really at some different factors and behaviors. Like this weekend with that Women in Sport event, I got to really talk about how conventional and or even sometimes some functional medicine guides women's sex hormones, right? And menstrual cycles. And it's like, oh, well, they just threw birth control at me, or, oh, they just threw like hormone replacement at me and told me to increase my magnesium. Like, kid you not, that was a conversation that I had with a gal. And so it just shows me that there's like some big gaps where we're not quite getting full opportunity to really kind of dig in and figure out how to take care of our health from a root cause perspective. So with that, like I said, this weekend I had an opportunity to talk about like women's health and hormones and menstrual cycles and the female athlete. And then really where I wanted to take our conversation today was building off of last week, where we really talked about the four main things that we're still getting wrong about gut health. Because then as soon as I had that Learn with Lo session last week, I also had multiple different conversations, but specifically one conversation that stuck out the most, where I got to talk to an individual, and she was struggling with gut health issues from a very, very young age, had been through the gamut of different conventional practitioners as well as even functional practitioners who had ran some like really in-depth labs with her, but didn't really give her even then like a root cause way to put it all together, right? And so one of the biggest things that I've kind of seen more and more frequently in this space is a misunderstanding, yes, about gut health, but even more specifically is kind of a misunderstanding about food sensitivities, right? That can usually be someone's first little gateway drug into this whole gut health realm, is when individuals start having symptoms, whether it's like overt gut health symptoms, right? I'm bloated when I eat this, or I'm constipated when I eat that, or I have loose urgent bowel movements, or I don't feel so good, or my skin breaks out when I eat that. That is usually like our first little dip the toe in the water. What the heck is this gut health journey that I'm about to partake in, right? But I think one of the biggest passion points that I have is putting a little bit more thought process around this food sensitivity piece, and making sure that we're truly interpreting things like food sensitivities the way that our body was actually trying to communicate them, right? And so food sensitivities aren't a root cause, right? That's something that I definitely want to shout from the rooftops. Like, you can't, if we have gut issues, removing foods is not fixing the gut. And that's where I think even like conventional and functional medicine both kind of mislead individuals. Like having a conversation with this 23-year-old gal last week who was having gut issues from the time that she was 8 years old, and has had multiple different endoscopies and colonoscopies, and even then, different breath tests and fructose testing and all of this different stuff, and all different doctors had all told her to do. They're like, well, just don't eat that food. Well, just don't eat that food. But at first it started out and like, well, just don't eat gluten. And then it's like, and then pretty soon she was reacting to dairy, and then it was soy, and then it was eggs, and then it was, and I'm like, wait a second. Now she has like now she self-purports, she's like, I have a very disordered relationship with food because all I was ever told was just eliminate these foods, but I still have all of the same gut issues. I'm like, exactly my point, right? There's so much misunderstanding about food sensitivities, and it can't just come with this short-sighted guidance of like, well, just don't eat that, right? So that's where I know I've been starting off 2024 really with a bang of kind of taking on some of these different topics for us and really digging in and talking about how these things actually function inside of our body so that we can have a more empowered and proactive approach around all of these different things that most of us are coming into contact with somewhere along the line of our health journey. So last week, we really, like I said, what we're getting wrong about gut health. Today, I really want to open up that what we're getting wrong about gut health and even extend it into some of these conversations and questions that I'm getting about food sensitivities. So from a high level, like anatomy and physiology overview, I think it's really helpful so that we're all on the same page. What are food sensitivities? Right? It usually sounds kind of like, well, duh, Lauryn, rocket science. It's when I don't feel good when I eat a food, so then I stop eating it, right? Sure, at a basic foundational level, yes, but more so, how is that manifesting inside of our body? Because once we understand how that's actually manifesting, we can see very, very quickly how we're blaming the wrong thing, right? So let me kind of explain. So when I think about food sensitivities, right? How the process of our digestion works. We ingest food, right, at the level of our mouth, right? Digestion actually starts when we see food, smell food. That's the cephalic phase of digestion where our brain actually gets involved with the process. But first, food is ingested into our mouth. We chew it. We swallow that food. And this is where the process of breaking food down into individual parts and pieces actually comes into play, right? So we get salivary enzymes, we get pancreatic enzymes, we get stomach acid involved, we get bile production involved, right? The whole process is our body says, hey, here's a whole food source. I need to break it down into the teeniest, tiniest little pieces, because by the time that food leaves the stomach, digestion cannot occur anymore. Digestion is done. Now is absorption, right? So this is where I think some people kind of get confused. They're like, oh, so if I'm not digesting my food properly, then I'm getting these big chunks of food that are leaving my stomach, going into my small intestine, and the small intestine can't absorb those foods. Exactly, right? So the small intestine is never designed to digest our food. It can't break it down into smaller pieces. That's the job of the mouth and the pancreas and the stomach and the bile. That's the job, right? If there's any kinks in any of that chain, we're going to get big chunks of undigested food coming into the small intestine, and the small intestine tries to absorb that food. It cannot do that. Right? So that's where we're going to get our first kind of symptoms around this food sensitivity piece, whether that's bloating, constipation, loose, urgent stools. Eventually, it might manifest as bigger food sensitivity situations, such as skin issues, hair loss, neuropathy, tingling in hands and feet, brain fog, lots of different ways that other food sensitivities can show up. So I want to reiterate this point because we're not going to develop food sensitivities to foods that are properly digested, right? So it's oh, okay, so if I'm breaking these foods down into individual teeny tiny little amounts the way my body was supposed to, then I'm not going to have an immune response to it. No, chances are not, because what happens is there's these different parts of our immune system. They're called dendritic cells or T regulatory cells. They're part of the small intestine, right? Because that's where our immune system is at. So the immune system is literally going into our gut and sampling the food as it goes by, right? Checking and making sure is this actual food? Is this a bacteria? Is this a virus? It's essentially being the guard, right, of the gate there to make sure that things that aren't supposed to get into the bloodstream don't get into the bloodstream. So if there are undigested food, right, things that are still in big chunks, the immune system's like, what the heck is that? I don't recognize it. Tag it, and it tags it with certain antigens, and then the body mounts a response to try to destroy it because it doesn't know what it is, right? It's like, it's just undigested food, but the body's like, yeah, but it could be something else. I'm just going to tag it just to make sure. So that process happens once, fine. That process happens twice, okay, right? That process happens multiple times a day, every day, not to mention some other environmental factors at play, and boom, we have ourselves what's called a leaky gut, or intestinal permeability, which is really just a fancy way of saying like that small intestine lining, it's starting to create like these micro separations. And now we're getting stuff into the bloodstream unchaperoned, right? And now the immune system's going real haywire, right? So when we start to think about like the lining of the small intestine kind of creating these little like micro separations, that's where we call intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut. The small intestine is actually only the thickness of a paper towel, right? It's super, super thin. So lots of different things can kind of start to slowly create micro tears, not just undigested food and dysbiosis, which is what happens when we have undigested food in our gut. The bacterial balance gets off, but stress can cause leaky gut, right? Specifically cortisol responses cause leaky gut. Exposure to different toxins, specifically glyphosate, this whole pesticide glyphosate conversation. Ironically, our gut bacteria actually hate glyphosate, right? So like some individuals struggle with leaky gut because of exposure to toxins that they can't detox properly from their body. Fatty liver disease and insulin resistance can also contribute to things like leaky gut patterns, as well as like low bacterial species in our gut. Lots of different things create this kind of like leaky gut picture, and all of it just ends up causing uncontrolled inflammation. Right? So when we start to think about this, you're like, okay, so digestion starts in the mouth, comes down to the stomach, the pancreas gets involved, the bile gets involved, like all of that is required to get my food broken down into individual components. And before my immune system can kind of sample it and make sure that it's like all good, all kosher. Yeah. So when you start to think about like the food sensitivity side of things, it's like, so when I consider this, the food sensitivities actually aren't the fault of the food. No, it's not, right? We're blaming the wrong thing, but rather it's the state of the gut when it's exposed to said food. So here we are, and this is, like I said, some people are like, well, tomato, like the food still bothers me. I'm like, no, that's a very real experience. You're not wrong. And I'm not saying that needing to minimize or eliminate some of these foods during that leaky gut kind of gut healing phase isn't necessary. Sure, I'm here talking about and trying to tell everybody that that's not the full picture, right? You can't sit here and just like eliminate all of these foods one after the other and not actually fix the root cause of the issue, which is like, it's not the food, people, it's the state of your gut, right? We need to start to really think about things like, maybe we have some digestive enzyme dysfunction. I see that all the time. We're not creating bile properly. We're not creating pancreatic enzymes. We have low stomach acid production, right? Maybe we need to consider the pH of the system, right? If our gut isn't acidic, we're going to have pathogenic overgrowths, right? So maybe we need to consider immune system dysregulation. We probably have some nutrient deficiencies going on. What about our overall toxin burden, right? So all along the way, we're blaming the wrong party. We're blaming the food. And so then this is what normally happens is it starts out innocent enough. And it's like, I think dairy's really bothering me. I have some skin issues. I saw on TikTok once that I should eliminate dairy because, skin and dairy don't go well. I'm like, okay, cool. Like try that out. How does that feel? And it's like, oh my gosh, I felt so great at first, but then all my acne ended up coming back. And now I also cut out gluten. And then my acne was still bothersome. So then I also cut out eggs. And I'm like, are we seeing a pattern of how this like isn't working, right? It's like one, food sensitivity is just leading to another, because it's our body trying to communicate with us like, you could eliminate foods all day long and the problem still exists. Like, when are we going to actually go after this like leaky gut story that I have going on in here? We can't just sit here and continue to eliminate foods and pretend that that's going to be the end all be all. It's not going to work that way, right? So that's where I got to have, and I've had this conversation so many different times before, which I love talking about the gut. I will geek out about it all day long, but I try to keep it like simple and understandable so that we can kind of get an insider view of what's going on in the gut and relate to it a little bit better. But that's where I was so excited to be able to share this conversation, with this 23-year-old that I met with last week, because she had been having issues since she was 8. Right? 8 years old, and she's 23 now. And it's like all of these functional practitioners running tests, all of these conventional GI doctors running tests for her. And it's like all of them have just said the same thing. Well, it's like, well, just don't eat that food or eliminate that food. And now she has trouble like with disordered eating patterns and a really anxious relationship with food, and still all of the same gut symptoms. So it's like, here we went through and thought we were doing a really good thing and eliminating some of these foods. And like, my question is like, did we actually just create more problems? Because now we have a poor relationship with food that didn't exist before we started these elimination diets. And now we have all of the same symptoms that we had before the elimination diets. So what did we really move forward on? I don't think we did. And that's what I'm trying to kind of connect the dots and kind of shout from the rooftops, so that you guys can come in with a little bit better understanding of seeing like, oh, okay. So what we're kind of still misunderstanding about this food sensitivities concept is food sensitivities are not the cause of leaky gut. They are the symptom of leaky gut. Abso-freaking-lutely. Like, when you have some of those like leaky gut or intestinal permeability, like, absolutely there's going to be some foods that make you feel like absolute shit, right? Because your immune system is tagging them, mounting an immune response against them, or they're getting into the bloodstream as like undigested food portions. Like, yeah, that would feel like absolute garbage. I would expect that you would probably feel, bloated and fatigued and brain fog and skin breakouts or rashes or whatever that's manifesting. I'm like, no, that's a very real symptom, but this is your body trying to communicate that it's not about the food. It's about the fact that we have an intestinal permeability issue going on, and we need to start to dig into, where is that coming from? How do we reverse it? So most people, like I said, that have had some of these like mystery inflammatory symptoms, bloating, hair loss, nerve pain, tingling, brain fog, all of that stuff, most of those people have been on a very long journey of trying to like self-diagnose and treating themselves with various food eliminations, whether that's cutting out gluten, cutting out dairy, cutting out soy, cutting out eggs, or following these even bigger elimination protocols like FODMAP diet or AIP protocol. And initially, most of those individuals at the beginning of this elimination diet, food sensitivity kind of journey, most of them do state that they feel better at first, right? Always. And I'm like, how did that feel? They're like, oh man, I felt great at first. I'm like, but the common theme that I see over and over again is the symptoms always come back. Even though they continue to stay off of gluten, or even though they continue to stay off of dairy, even though they continue to follow their diet to a T, like at some point the symptoms all come back, right? Maybe the exact same symptoms, or the symptoms come back but just in a different way. And it's like, oh no, the bloating feels better, but now I have this hair loss or this brain fog or this tingling, or now I'm constipated, or now I'm like, it's just the same inflammation, just showing up in a different way. So the symptoms either come back, or the symptoms come back slightly in a different way. And then what do? Then we eliminate another food, right? And it's like, it's not about the food, it's about the state of the gut. So these symptoms are trying to communicate like a bigger picture of this like overall intestinal permeability. So I want you guys to understand that removing the food does not fix the problem. It can be part of the treatment strategy, but it's definitely not the whole treatment strategy, right? If we just stop there, we're probably going to cause more long-term issues than anything else. And we're probably going to lead to wanting to eliminate more foods in the future when more symptoms pop up, instead of using that as a tool of like, oh, maybe I need to like try something different. So don't get me wrong, like removing some of these like main inflammatory food offenders is going to be a key part of like the first phase of our protocol. No doubt about it, right? We may need to eliminate some of those things that our body is just like attacking or noticing as like offenders right now. But the biggest mistake that I tend to see in conventional and even functional medicine, yes, is that we think that removing the food alone is going to fix the issue. And I cannot tell you how many people come back to me after being told their issues would be solved by simply going gluten-free, dairy-free, or whatever free, or being told like, oh, their symptoms would go away and everything would be fixed if they just followed like a restrictive diet like FODMAP or AIP, or they were told that all their symptoms would go away if they just start taking some gut healing supplements like fiber or glutamine, or here's a probiotic, or here's some greens. It's like, or even worse is like handing them like an antimicrobial or some antibiotics or a stool softener or a antacid medication. It's like, oh, here, all your problems will go away. I'm like, those are the symptoms of the problem, right? We can cover those symptoms up all day long, but it's not going to necessarily fix the root cause of that issue. So by now we know that, like I said, it's not the food that's the cause. We know that to be successful long-term, we're going to have to get to the root cause of where is the digestive dysfunction. Why is the gut a prime breeding ground right now for some of those food sensitivities in the gut? How are we going to actually come about fixing the entire gut ecosystem as a whole, so that we can really like treat it, right? So in my practice, when I'm kind of treating some of these like leaky gut food sensitivity type of things, sure, we can talk about the foods. Of course, we're going to talk about like the biggest offender foods, but my ultimate goal, believe it, my ultimate goal is for that person to be able to eat as diverse and expanded diet as possible. My goal is not to make them more restricted. My goal is actually to make it to where they can reintroduce as many of those foods as feels best for them. That's my ultimate goal, right? Why? Because a healthy gut is a diverse gut. So we don't want to create more restriction because that actually is not solving the problem. So when I think about like treating this leaky gut picture, I'm thinking about definitely improving their digestive capacity. How are we breaking our food down? How are we improving the entire pH of the gut so that we make sure that these things don't happen again? Also, what about blood sugar balance? Because without blood sugar balance, we're probably not creating enough digestive enzymes and enough stomach acid, and our liver probably is really working way too hard. We're going to need to correct any nutrient deficiencies because things like stomach acid require minerals like zinc and magnesium, right? We need to consider immune system function. We need to consider nervous system dysfunction. We need to consider toxin burden, right? Like, and this isn't true like that everybody runs through this list, but this is where my list runs through. When I see someone with food sensitivities, I start to think about these things. I start to think about their digestive enzymes and the pH of their stomach. And I think about nutrient deficiencies and blood sugar balance and toxin burden and immune system and nervous system regulation. Like, I'm not thinking about the food, because the food is really just telling me and guiding me as a practitioner that something's up here. And if we just eliminate the food and move on, that's no better than just a Band-Aid strategy, right? Not to mention that I think it's worth having a conversation about, wrapping us up today, that testing for food sensitivities can often cause like unnecessary restriction. And it can also cause a whole host of disordered eating tendencies. You guys have maybe seen this in other people in your lives. Maybe you've experienced this in yourself. And there's like various types of food sensitivity testing. There's lots of different nuances here of the different types of testing. I won't, like I said, go into it too much today, but just know that when we test for food sensitivities, we can test for like a true sensitivity, which is called an IgA or an IgG immune response, or someone has like an overt food allergy, which is like an IgE anaphylactic kind of response, right? So there's a difference between food sensitivities and food allergies. Food sensitivities are those things that we can usually kind of reverse and put into remission with the proper work on the leaky gut. Yeah. Is someone going to somehow cure themselves of a food allergy? Probably not, right? So you kind of have to differentiate between food allergies and food sensitivities. Also know that like standard food sensitivity tests, they test for like 90 to 150 different foods. That's freaking ridiculous, right? That's a ton of different foods. And the whole goal that they're doing is they are testing your body's immune system response to whole, undigested food, right? So it's like, oh, well, that makes sense then why I might react to and light up a food sensitivity test like a Christmas tree. It's not because I need to eliminate all these foods. It's that test is then telling me like, ooh, I got some serious work to do on the state of my gut and the state of my digestive function. I'm like, that's what a test lit up like a Christmas tree is trying to tell you. And I think more so than anything, individuals go and they have these food sensitivity tests because they're desperate for answers around their symptoms. And then they end up getting a message of like more restriction. And they're like, I have to eliminate all of these foods that I'm highly or moderately reactive to. And it's like, no, that's not what that test is saying. That test is actually should be interpreted as your body is unable to digest and process all of these different food proteins. And now we need to ask why. It's not about eliminating the food. It's about expanding and improving your body's digestive and absorptive capacity and digging into why is your body having an immune response to all of these different foods. So to me, it's just like highly ironic where there's like so many different practitioners out there that are like, gut health experts, and they're using food sensitivity testing, and all the power to them because I think they're really trying to help. But we know that like the number one key for a healthy gut is nutritional diversity, not restriction. So a lot of times like individuals that have some of like the worst gut health, they're coming to me and they have the least expansive diet because like everything hurts, nothing digests well, nothing feels good. They've run the gamut of eliminating all of these different foods, but the symptoms still exist. I'm like, okay, so are we ready to give up that it's the food, right? It's like there's the common denominator here is your gut, right? We need to go in and do some really investigative work there and work on improving the entire ecosystem so that your body can tolerate and digest all of these foods versus just continuously eliminating them and thinking that we're going to get to the answer. We're probably going to get more problems on the other side than more answers, right? So when we think about that, like I said, I just caution against the food sensitivity testing because I find more than anything, it creates like this psychophysiological mechanism that triggers a lot of anxiety. And especially if it's anxiety around food, which is something that all of us as humans are going to have to navigate multiple times a day, every day for the rest of our lives. If that is causing someone anxiety, that is a huge burden on the gut-brain axis, and I know that that's not going to be a great place to heal in that state as well too. So to me, it's like causing more anxiety, causing more food sensitivities in individuals, and kind of blaming the food, I don't think is going to be our root cause magic solution that we're looking for. So if all of this resonates with you, I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. Let me know how, like I said, this maybe has manifested in your life or in loved ones' lives. If this is something that you feel like you're personally struggling with, then you would probably be a great candidate for more one-on-one consulting work with me where we can really do some functional labs and kind of dig into the root causes of those as well too. Like I said, if you have anybody in your family or anybody that you know is struggling kind of with food sensitivities and they've been down this road and rigmarole of not getting answers, send them this and have them start to think bigger about the gut as a whole. So happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully all of that feels empowering information, and you guys can take that and spread the word to other loved ones in your life. So I'm excited. We'll be back for more Learn with Flo next Monday.